Now, Mr. Ray's conspiracy theory. Well, the battle lines have been drawn there, haven't they? Because what Mr. Ray did is basically dared the court to look at what's there, to take an interest in it, to be concerned about it. And the court said, nah, not going to do that. Now I understand exactly why. I do. The 7-day issue, it's a problem. And I know I saw a lot of people in the chat. I think I might have even starred one. Yeah, I did. I starred one. The 7 days doesn't apply to Nick Balance calling AT&T directly. We don't have a record to tell us whether it does or not. We don't know because it hasn't been submitted in court. That's how we need a record to be able to establish that. All we needed to do was have it in Cy Ray's affidavit, if that's the case, that judge, the 7 days doesn't apply. That's all they needed to do. But they didn't do that. And that's why Judge is pointing out that silence is really telling. And I can't disagree with him. It is a problem. And judging by how Ann Taylor was handling that in those questions, it kind of does sound like they're conceding. She's like, this is new information to me. Well, you could have argued that. Pointed out that the reason why we are suspicious of this information that we're being provided by the state and by the state's agents is because it keeps changing. Nobody said way back when this first came up, there was a 7-day time limit. In fact, the first explanation that was given was you couldn't get any of this until 2023. When defendants change their stories, witnesses change their stories, they call that consciousness of guilt. And they point out, it goes to credibility and you can't trust anything they say and trying to hide something. When the state changes their story, I guess we're supposed to just overlook that.
Welcome to Docket Decoder. If you enjoy our content, please help us out by hitting that like button or leaving your comments for us. And don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with the latest court filings. One of the things that's become more and more frustrating in the Bryan Kohberger case is just how many important aspects remain unknown, and how many may stay that way if this case never goes to trial. Among the many lingering frustrations in the case, one question that has stood out for many is what happened to Cy Ray. Cy Ray was a highly regarded expert with decades of law enforcement and forensic cell data experience. Mr. Ray was retained by the defense and submitted an affidavit in March 2025 that sharply challenged the state's claims about the availability of AT&T Timing Advance records.
Your Honor, we call Cy Ray.
Okay, thank you.
What background led you to this job?
I started with a law enforcement background. I started my law enforcement career in 1995 in Arizona. Started working with the first set of cell phone records in that capacity in late 1997. So most of my early training came directly from the carriers. If I was working a case with Verizon or AT&T, I would work directly with Verizon or AT&T engineers to understand the records, what they meant, how to map them, how to interpret this. Around 2004, I started doing a lot of work with cell site simulators. In 2012, our department created a position that this was a full-time position. That's all I did was track phones pretty much every day. Using cell site simulators, using phone records, whatever technology we could leverage. Because of the lack of training that was available when I was a younger officer, in 2007, I started a training company. At the time it was called Phoenix Training. And I created a training company to provide law enforcement training, specifically as it relates to cell phone records. And I wrote a program that I could take phone records from any carrier in the United States, and I could put it in this program, and it would immediately map hundreds, if not thousands, of connections. I had a lot of agencies asking me for a copy of my mapping program, and I was just about 20 years at that point. I realized maybe it's time to go do something else. So in May of 2014, I retired from the police department, and I started a company called ZETX, Z-E-T-X.
When the defense filed Cyre's affidavit in support of their objection to the state's motion in limine regarding AT&T Timing Advance records, it had the effect of completely shifting the tone of the proceedings, raising serious questions about the integrity of the state's disclosures, and placing a respected expert's credibility directly at odds with the prosecution's narrative.
In 2014, I retired from law enforcement and started a business called ZETX that created software for law enforcement to map and analyze call detail records. As part of that business, we maintained software that supported every known call detail record provided to law enforcement in the United States. To date, the system has analyzed over 3 billion, that's with a B, calls from call detail records provided by cellular phone companies in the United States. In 21, LexisNexis purchased ZETX. Congratulations to you, sir.
LexisNexis purchased ZETX? Bro, congratulations on that. He was like, this is a huge problem. Let me fix this problem. And LexisNexis is like, let us back up the Brinks truck to you and give you all of the money. Well played. Well played. In 2021, LexisNexis purchased ZETX and to date is still using and selling the software I created. As a result of this experience, that's a lot of experience. I have worked directly with engineers at the cell phone companies for over 2 decades, and I am intimately familiar with the type of data they maintain. I would imagine so if you're making software to solve problems. Best way to build software. How do you choose a software? You identify a problem and solve the problem. In addition to my law enforcement experience, I've instructed classes utilizing cell phone records in criminal investigations for nearly 20 years. It seems like this individual has a grasp of technology. I've had over 30,000 law enforcement officers attend these courses. Right. I created the first geolocation cellular investigation subject matter expert course in this field because law enforcement was bad at it. Right. And the cell phone companies did not do a great job of explaining things to law enforcement. You need a bridge in between those conversations. And it looks like he taught people to become that bridge.
I have worked directly with engineers at the cellular phone companies for over 2 decades and am intimately familiar with the type of data they maintain in the normal course of business and provide to law enforcement through a legal demand process. I mean, think about this for a resume for a defense expert. In addition to my law enforcement experience, I have instructed classes on utilizing cellular records in criminal investigations for nearly 20 years. I have had over 30,000 law enforcement officers attend these courses and or presentations on this subject matter. In 2014, I created the first geolocation cellular investigation subject matter expert course in this field, offered to state and local law enforcement officers.
Have you testified as an expert in this field?
I have. If it's not 100 times, it's right there near it. Roughly 100 times in both state and federal.
And have you been qualified as an expert in state courts?
Yes.
In federal courts?
Yes.
Do you usually work with the defense?
This is the first time I've ever testified for defense.
Fair to say you usually are a prosecution witness?
That is a very fair statement.
I'm trying to find my place. Apart from this case, all my testimony in this field has been on behalf of the prosecution. That was a dramatic pause, but it wasn't intentional. It is only in rare cases and circumstances I have ever considered working on the side of the defense.
As a result of this work, I established well-known and used best practices. He's like, I'm not the expert in the field. I created the field. Methodology, you say, I created the methodology. This is like the dude of the dude. As a result of this work, I've established well-known and used best practices within the discipline of call detail record analysis. Over 1,000 law enforcement agencies have attended my courses on the subject matter of cellular record analysis, including the FBI, ATF, Marshals, DEA, DHS, all the things. Through my work in this discipline, being able to teach a thing and then also building a thing and then also working with a thing, that's a lot. Through my work in this discipline, I am regularly consulted by the prosecution on investigations around the world. As a recognized subject matter expert in the field, I have testified on the matter more than 100 times throughout the US in both federal and state courts, I imagine. Apart from this case, all of my testimony in the field has been on behalf of the prosecution. Right, because law enforcement background. It is only in rare cases and circumstances I have ever considered working on the side of defense. Oh, juries are going to like this expert. We'll see how he testifies, but juries are going to like this expert. It's like, I worked in law enforcement. I understand law enforcement. I train law enforcement. I generally work for the prosecution, but in this case, I have thoughts. Interesting.
The first time he's ever testified for the defense, which matters when it comes to bias. He isn't some hired gun. He isn't some shill that just says whatever you want him to say. I have worked extensively with timing advance data from the cellular phone network providers over the past 15 years. I have testified to the use of timing advance data numerous times. I have created and taught hundreds of classes on this subject matter to law enforcement. I am extremely familiar with the type of timing advance records available from U.S. cellular providers, their retention periods, and the legal process to obtain those records.
In his affidavit, Mr. Ray made serious accusations against several individuals involved in the investigation and prosecution of the case. Those accusations included claims that the prosecution deliberately misrepresented the availability of AT&T Timing Advance records, that investigators and prosecutors knowingly withheld exculpatory evidence, and that the chain of custody for key data was manipulated or misrepresented. He specifically alleged that prosecutor Ashley Jennings had been made aware of the existence of TA data in 2022, yet later filed motions implying it was not available, an act Ray described as a deliberate misrepresentation intended to conceal false statements used to obtain probable cause.
In my review of this information, there is evidence to suggest the chain of custody involving these records and COA were produced well outside of AT&T's normal practice. How about that? Does it mean Bryan Kohberger is innocent? No. But is this a problem? Yes. Is this affidavit a problem? If everything in it is true? Yes. There is missing information and data associated with this request. Also a problem. Discovery violation, potentially Brady violation. I am inclined to believe it as true based on this guy's resume and the fact that he was willing to swear to it under oath in this affidavit.
There was no doubt the author of this current motion, prosecutor Ashley Jennings, knew or should have known AT&T Timing Advance data did exist in 2022. She was directly involved in the legal process obtaining it and was aware of work product created from it to further the investigation. The current motion is a deliberate misrepresentation to the court to further conceal false statements used to obtain probable cause against the defendant and conceal exculpatory evidence from discovery. That's a big allegation. In my nearly 30 years of working with and for prosecutors all over the United States, I have never witnessed such a deliberate attempt by prosecutors to mislead the court on evidence in such plain sight. That is a big allegation. Anyone making such a claim would have to believe the court is incapable of reviewing. Oh, he's challenging the judge. Oh boy. Anyone making such a claim would have to believe the court is incapable of reviewing physical evidence in possession of the state and defense. It raises to a level beyond a simple miscommunication or oversight and is clear and intentional misrepresentation in hopes to conceal a much larger issue.
And the affidavit that has been filed by Bryan Kohberger and his team from their expert with I can't even explain how much experience and expertise this guy has. For him to come out and say what he said about the prosecutors in Bryan Kohberger's case shocked me. And here's my point. I don't think this guy would lie about this. And I don't think that he would swear under oath if he was going to lie about this. This is his career, reputation on the line. It doesn't make any sense for him to lie, which is why I tend to believe what he's saying here.
In the state's March 24th, 2025 reply to the defense's objection, prosecutors introduced a new and critical piece of information that AT&T, prior to June 2023, only retained timing advance records for 7 days. This meant that unless law enforcement submitted a legal request within 7 days of the relevant activity, those records would be no longer available. They would be automatically purged. According to the state, Bryan Kohberger became a suspect on December 19, 2022, and a search warrant for his AT&T records was not issued until December 23rd, more than a month after the homicides occurred on November 13th. Because of this timing, the state argued that timing advance records for Kohberger's phone during the key period were already gone by the time the warrant was served. Therefore, the absence of these records was not due to misconduct or concealment, but simply due to AT&T's retention policy.
Your Honor, we're requesting the court deny the state's motion and allow us to cross-examine their expert, Nicholas Balance, with regard to timing advance records.
What evidence do you have that timing advance records existed that the state could have acquired for Mr. Kohberger?
Well, Your Honor, specific...
I've read your affidavit of Mr. Ray, and he seems to entirely ignore the 7-day issue and doesn't address it.
I need more information. The prosecution has been incredibly vague in this. The lawyer saying this information does not exist in 2022 when the information does not exist from their point of contact is narrowly parsed. And I don't know if that is a problem or not a problem yet, because I still have questions about that 7-day window. Because if it's outside the 7-day window, it doesn't exist, period. And no one has yet said the 7-day window at this period of time is not the window. Outside of 7 days, it doesn't exist. Objection vague. All of it.
We've never heard from Nick Balance, who is FBI and who has the back door.
From AT&T.
You've heard from AT&T that GLDC did not produce these records in 2022. You've absolutely heard that from AT&T. What you haven't heard is the other way that...
That's the other way. I haven't heard that either. I've heard a general description, and I've heard in the affidavit that he received some once, and they said, oh, no, don't use those. I don't know if those were acquired within the 7 days. He doesn't address the 7 days. And that's a glaring, particularly given the inflammatory language in that accusations in that affidavit, it's a glaring omission. It's his obligation and your obligation to establish that evidence of that the state has this. And you haven't done that. His affidavit is quite extensive, and he seems to ignore that issue.
Your Honor, I believe that that issue is touched on with his knowledge that these kinds of records existed a long time before.
He said that in a very general way about that without reference to the 7 days, and he supposedly received them from some FBI expert to look at for his company, and then was told not to use them. So I don't know, maybe the FBI got him in a way that they weren't supposed to at that time, for all I know. He didn't name names, he didn't identify it, he didn't put it into any context. The state had indicated and provided AT&T's sworn testimony that they only keep them for 7 days. And yet he makes the accusations that he did in his affidavit without addressing that 7-day issue at all. And so I guess my point is if you want to cross-examine the witnesses about why didn't they rely on the AT&T timing information, you've got to show some factual foundation that was available to them. By the time Mr. Kohberger was on their radar, as it relates to November 13. And I'm not seeing that as the problem.
So let's talk about how the confusion around Cy Ray's affidavit didn't come from a lack of intelligence, or bias, or sloppy thinking. It came from something much simpler.
Really, timing is what's at issue.
Thank you, Ashley. Yes, that is correct. If you were following the Kohberger case closely and reading through the motions, objections, affidavits, you probably did what most of us do. You read the documents in the order that they were filed. That seems like the logical thing to do, right? The state files a motion on February 24th. The defense objects on March 17th. The state replies on March 24th. And then Cyray's affidavit shows up on March 26th, supporting the defense's objection. And if you don't look closely at the signing date on the affidavit, or the location it was signed from, it looked like Cyray read all the arguments, including the state's final reply, and still chose to accuse the prosecution of deliberate misrepresentation. And that's where the confusion began. Let's start by going back to the original motion filed by the state regarding AT&T Timing Advance records on February 24th. And I want you to notice that the 7 days are never mentioned in this unbelievably short motion.
The state brings this motion based on defense counsel's repeated references to the alleged existence, you can see where the fight is, the alleged existence of AT&T Timing Advance records related to defendant's cell phone. And then they cite where the defense has brought those up. The state has been advised and will offer documentation or testimony that AT&T records are produced by their Global Legal Demand Center. AT&T GLDC did not begin producing timing advance records until May 2023. All records for defendant's phone were obtained from GLDC in December 2022. The state intends to supplement this motion with additional information from, oh boy, from who?
The FBI!
The
FBI!
And or AT&T prior to hearing on this motion on April 9th. Any statements or inferences by defense counsel or their witnesses that there is additional evidence that could have been provided or was not provided is a mischaracterization and should not be allowed. That's what the state is arguing. That any references to additional records is a mischaracterization. That's the entirety of their motion.
The 7-day window was not mentioned in the state's original February 24th motion, the very motion Cyray was responding to in his affidavit. When Ray completed and signed his affidavit on March 25th, just 1 day after the state's reply, it's very unlikely that he had seen or reviewed this new document, especially given that he was located in Maricopa County, Arizona, and that it had been one of 29 filings that had been uploaded to the docket the previous day. It was hard to believe that someone with Cyray's background and experience, former homicide detective, a nationally recognized cell data expert who's worked on thousands of cases, and almost always for the prosecution, would suddenly throw away his entire reputation just to back a guilty defendant. But when Judge Steven Hippler dismissed his affidavit out of hand, and even suggested it bordered on a conspiracy theory, it left a dark cloud hanging over Ray's credibility. There was a showdown looming between Judge Hippler and Cyray when the trial happened. But then the plea deal happened. And it looked like we might not ever get answers. So I started going back through the documents, trying to understand why Cyray's testimony never got a fair hearing, and why it seemed to collapse under accusations that didn't quite add up. At the April 9th hearing, Judge Steven Hippler repeatedly interrupted the defense counsel as she attempted to clarify the timeline surrounding Ray's filing. The judge dismissed the affidavit as a conspiracy theory and then denied Ray, who was available and willing, the opportunity to testify. What was overlooked by the court, and by much of the public, is something now hiding in plain sight. Ray signed his affidavit on March 25th, 2025, just 1 day after the state filed a key reply brief on March 24th. That reply, for the first time, claimed that AT&T only retained timing advance data for 7 days prior to June 2023, a point that undermined the defense's argument, but was not part of the state's original motion. Ray's affidavit was not a rebuttal to that March 24th filing. It was a response to the February 24th motion, and in support of the March 17th defense objection. Instead of helping the court understand this timing issue, Judge Hippler appeared dismissive and combative, brushing past legitimate concerns and painting a respected expert's analysis in a conspiratorial light. and all while preventing him from defending or clarifying his position. For many, this moment has come to symbolize the broader fear surrounding the case, that if it ever reached trial, the truth, whatever that is, may remain buried beneath sealed filings and judicial missteps and lost opportunities for transparency. Obviously, Cy Ray was aware the Timing Advance records had a limited shelf life, and we know he was aware of this because he discussed this very issue with his wife Carrie on their podcast, Socialite Crime Club.
Yeah, let's talk about shelf life really quick. So one challenge that does come up with timing data is the retention period. How long the phone company keeps these records changes dramatically. So with regular phone records, which is cell tower information, I can usually go back a year. So let's say a crime is committed January 1st. I don't figure out who the suspect is until August 1st. I can still go back and get the phone records from January 1st. With timing data, depending on the carrier, that data may be purged. So it's really important to look at when did they figure out who the suspect was, and by the time they figured him out and they had probable cause to get the records, were the records still being maintained by the phone company or had they already purged?
When we look back at the hearing, you can see that Ann Taylor was trying to explain this to Judge Hippler, who had no interest in hearing her out.
We have had different bits of information.
For the 7 days that are after December, in December?
No, Your Honor, because the 7 days is something that's newer and has been brought to my attention
Our
more
motion is
recently.
compelled related to timing advance records for November 13.
Our discovery requests were for all of Mr. Kohberger's timing advance records. Our motions to compel covered all of them too. I have this carrier request now that says 7 days, and I have the affidavit now that says 7 days. Those are not things that I always knew when we were litigating this issue.
Okay. The state had indicated and that provided AT&T's sworn testimony that they only keep them for 7 days. And yet he makes the accusations that he did in his affidavit without addressing that 7-day issue at all.
Judge Hippler obviously didn't realize that sworn affidavit provided by the state had not been provided in time for Cy Ray to get that information before he wrote his affidavit. When you look at the full picture, not just the order of the filings, but the dates, the signatures, the docket flood, it becomes clear Cy Ray was right. His affidavit was a direct and well-founded response to the state's original motion. He wasn't dodging new information. He wasn't ignoring the so-called 7-day policy. He simply hadn't been made aware of it in the state's filings at that point. The state didn't include it in their original motion, and their reply wasn't filed until the day before Ray signed his affidavit, in Arizona no less. But none of that mattered when it came time for the court to weigh the defense's position. Ann Taylor tried to clarify. She tried to explain the timing. She tried to point out that Ray had not seen the March 24th reply. She was repeatedly cut off, shut down, and brushed aside. The judge asked a question, then refused to listen to her answers. And most telling of all, Cy Ray made himself available to testify at the hearing. He was ready to speak directly to the court, to clarify any confusion, to defend the integrity of his work. And Judge Steven Hippler refused to hear from him. That wasn't just a missed opportunity. That was a failure of the court to do what it's supposed to do, to seek justice through a fair process. Instead, the judge let his emotions and his clear discomfort from the seriousness of Ray's allegations override his responsibility to remain impartial. He painted the affidavit as reckless, speculative, even disbarment worthy, but he never allowed one person who could clear it up to speak. And in doing that, he denied justice, not just to the defense, not just to Bryan Kohberger, but to everyone involved in this case, including the families of the victims, and the public desperate for answers. Because when a court won't hear the full story, especially from someone who spent his entire career helping law enforcement put away the guilty, then justice isn't being served, it's being managed. And that should concern every one of us.
When Ms. Jennings was talking about the defense's motion is just replete with these misrepresentations, where was the outrage about that? Wasn't that the type of accusation that we said we weren't supposed to be doing? But it's not a problem. It's not a problem if the defense, if the state gets up there and impugns the defense counsel's litigation of their issues. You can get up there and say they're misrepresenting things, and that's okay. No, they're advocating. You can say they're wrong about certain things, they're mistaken, but you're up there calling them liars to make their point. And where's the outrage? That's only for Mr. Ray. That's only for Mr. Ray. I really would like to see some of the same energy being shared. Doesn't seem like that should be, you know, a real egregious expectation. Is that hard to treat both parties the same? If you're going to get all upset about him doing it, shouldn't you at least tell her, Ms. Jennings, I just told you guys not to do that kind of thing? No, it's just, you know, completely gone by unpassed, no comment on it. And guess what? Because of that, she's going to continue to do it. It's a habit that she has. She likes to call the defense liars just as much, if not more, than they have called her one. So just maybe pay attention to that, Judge. Just maybe pay attention to it.